It always seems to happen at 3 a.m. That's the magic hour when a sleeping bag decides to betray you. This one night, up in the Adirondacks, I went to bed thinking I had it all figured out. The day had been warm, almost too warm for late September, so I left the zipper of my bag half undone, figuring I'd appreciate the extra ventilation. By midnight, though, the temperature had plummeted. The air coming off the lake crept under the tent walls and wrapped around me like an icy hand. I shivered awake, teeth clicking like a pair of castanets, and fumbled for the zipper. That's when the trouble began. The zipper had snagged, of course. Not just a little catch you can work free with a tug or two, but the kind of jam where the fabric folds in on itself and pinches tighter the harder you pull. I was half asleep, arms flailing, muttering into the dark as if the bag itself were some mischievous critter trying to keep me hostage. One second I was sweating from the effort. The next second I was freezing again because the bag was wide open and letting all the cold air rush in. Somewhere outside the tent, an owl gave a low hoot, almost like it was laughing at me. I grumbled and yanked harder, and suddenly the zipper shot free, carrying half the lining with it. Now the bag wasn't sealed at all, just a limp flap of nylon that offered about as much warmth as a wet towel. I lay there in the dark, wrestling with the mess, too stubborn to admit defeat. The sound of my own struggle must have woken my buddy Mike in the next tent over, because he called out, "What are you fighting in there? A bear?" "No," I hissed back, "just my sleeping bag." He chuckled and rolled over, leaving me to my misery. I tried curling into a ball, tucking the ripped side under me, but every move seemed to let another draft slip in. My choices were simple: sweat under too many layers zipped up tight, or freeze with the bag half broken open. And at that hour, with the cold stars pricking down through the tent fabric, neither choice felt much like victory. By the time the second owl hooted, I knew I wasn't getting back to sleep unless I did something drastic. I tried rolling to one side and bunching the torn half of the bag around me, but the more I shifted, the more the nylon slipped away. Cold air slithered down my neck and between my socks. Began. Finally, I leaned over and bit the zipper pull with my teeth. Probably looked ridiculous, knowing that my sleeping bag in the middle of the night, but desperate times call for desperate measures. With a sharp jerk of my head, the thing gave way, but not without a loud rip that made my stomach drop. I froze, listening for signs I'd just torn the bag wide open. But no, the rip had only caught a seam along the inner baffle. Still, it left a tuft of synthetic fill poking out like a puff of white smoke. That's when I made the midnight decision. No more fighting. I shoved one arm through the torn flap and wore the bag like some lopsided cloak. It wasn't warm, not really, but it trapped just enough heat to keep me from shivering. I sat there, hunched like a monk in a ragged robe, watching my breath plume in the faint glow of moonlight filtering through pine branches. Every little sound outside seemed sharper at that hour. The creak of a tree trunk shifting in the wind, the trickle of water down by the lake, even the rustle of a mouse nosing around the campfire ashes. And there I was, wrapped in a mangled sleeping bag, half laughing at myself and half resenting the cold. Sleep, at that point, seemed a lost cause. Still, I had one advantage. Sitting upright, swaddled in my makeshift cloak, I could keep a decent eye on the tent door. If some curious raccoon or bear wandered in, at least I'd be awake enough to meet it face to face. Not that I felt very heroic, looking like a scarecrow whose straw stuffing was leaking out. And so the long night stretched on, each hour dragging heavier than the last, until I finally realized I'd have to come up with another plan, or spend the rest of the night just waiting for the sun. I don't know if it was stubbornness or survival instinct, but somewhere around what I guessed was 3:30 a.m., I decided waiting wasn't going to cut it. I needed warmth, and I needed it now. The bag as a cloak idea had slowed my shivering, but my toes were still blocks of ice, and every breeze that snuck through the seams of the tent felt like a knife. That's when my eyes landed on the layers, and for the first time all night, I felt a bit of comfort. Not cozy, not luxurious, just the kind of fragile warmth that makes you sigh in relief and pray it'll last. Of course, that's when the zipper betrayed me again. I tried shifting to tuck the bag tighter, and the half-busted slider caught my fleece. In one smooth move, I managed to trap myself, arms pinned awkwardly at my sides, bag twisted like a straitjacket, legs still crammed into my backpack. It was a ridiculous sight. I riddled and thrashed like a moth tangled in a spider's web, but the more I struggled, the tighter the knot seemed to pull. Outside, I heard Mike's muffled laugh again. "You alive in there, Houdini?" he called, his voice groggy with sleep. "Barely," I muttered back, though I couldn't help but laugh myself. The absurdity of it all, the cold, the zipper, the backpack leg warmers, it was too much not to. That laughter warmed me more than anything else in that moment. So there I sat, bundled like some experimental survivalist, chuckling in the dark with my buddy half asleep in the next tent. The night was still cold, the wind still whistling through the trees, but for a while, the fight against the zipper didn't feel quite so miserable. And in that strange mixture of exhaustion and relief, I started drifting back toward sleep, though I knew it wouldn't last for long. When the first gray streaks of dawn slipped through the tent walls, I felt like I'd survived a battle. My body was stiff from holding that awkward bundled position, and my toes were still numb despite their backpack cocoon. The sounds of morning, songbirds shaking off the night, a squirrel scolding something in the trees, felt both comforting and cruel. Comforting because the long, cold hours had finally ended. Cruel because I knew I looked ridiculous and I'd have to explain myself to Mike. The zipper had me in such a knot that it took a good 5 minutes just to wriggle free. When I finally crawled out of the tent, I emerged half draped in fleece, one leg still stuck halfway in my backpack. My hair stood on end from static, and bits of synthetic insulation clung to me like snowflakes. Mike was crouched over the camp stove, already heating water for coffee. He glowed strange pride in knowing I'd made it through. My survival system of backpack, fleece, and torn sleeping bag might have been laughable, but it had gotten the job done. Still, the evidence of my battle was everywhere. The sleeping bag looked pitiful, lining ripped open, tufts of stuffing poking out like a wounded animal. My backpack straps were stretched from their overnight duty as improvised leg warmers. Even my rain jacket was smeared with pine needles from where I'd dragged it around in the dark. Mike offered me another grin. "Guess we're stopping at the outfitter's on the way home. You need gear that doesn't fight back." I couldn't argue. But as I sat there, warming up with the first rays of sun and the smoke curling around us, I felt a strange fondness for the whole mess. The struggle, the absurdity, even the zipper's betrayal. It was all part of the memory now. And the more I thought about it, the funnier it seemed. I hadn't been attacked by bears or caught in a storm. I'd been defeated by my own gear. Somehow, that felt more humbling than anything nature could throw at me. Later that morning, as we broke camp and packed up, I kept eyeing that mangled sleeping bag. Part of me wanted to toss it in the fire pit and watch it go up in smoke, but another part of me knew it had earned a sort of weird respect. It hadn't kept me warm the way it should have, but it had forced me to improvise, to adapt, to make do with what I had. And that, in a way, is the heart of camping. Figuring things out when nothing goes quite like you planned. As Mike stuffed his tent into its sack, he said, "You know, you'll laugh about this one day." I looked at him, still clutching the limp bag, and shook my head. "I'm already laughing," I admitted. My body was sore, my eyes felt gritty from lack of sleep, and I smelled like campfire smoke and defeat, but I couldn't stop grinning. There's something freeing about realizing you survived the night, even if you look like a scarecrow bundled in nylon and backpacks. On the trail out, with the sun climbing higher and the cold finally loosening its grip, I thought about all the tangled in a stubborn zipper. Those are the nights that teach you patience, humility, and the art of laughing at yourself. By the time we reached the trailhead, the bag was lashed to my pack, still shedding bits of sunlight like breadcrumbs along the path. And I thought, if a bear follows this trail of fluff, he's in for a real disappointment.